Hello everyone, welcome to today's story. What happens when love and revenge collide? Can James forgive the man who hurt the woman he loves? And will Diep ever escape the painful past that haunts her? In today's story, we follow James and Diep through an emotional journey of trust, betrayal, and tough choices. Their love is tested, but can they truly find peace? Or will the shadows of the past destroy everything? Stay tuned to find out what happens next. Will forgiveness be possible, or will anger consume them? Don't forget to subscribe and help us reach 1,000 followers. You won't want to miss what comes next. James sat at his desk, the sunlight streaming through the window highlighting the map of properties he had been reviewing. His fingers gently traced the lines of each plot, each one holding a different promise, but none felt quite right. Yet, as his eyes landed on a particular piece of land, something stirred within him. This place was perfect, not too far, not too close, surrounded by nature's calm. His thoughts drifted to Diep, imagining the life she could have here. A life not just built from bricks and wood, but from the love and care he had for her. This will be the place, James whispered to himself. Yet there was still an unshakable doubt lingering in his mind. Could she truly find peace here in a new home, or would the memories of her painful past haunt her forever? The thought of her suffering made his chest tighten. Diep had been through so much, and it was time for her to have a place where she could heal, where she could leave the darkness behind. But what if the scars ran deeper than he realized? He picked up his phone and dialed his mother, seeking her opinion, knowing she would understand him better than anyone. "Mom, I'm thinking of building a house for Diep. It'll be simple, wooden with 2 rooms, one for the kitchen, one for the living space. Do you think she'll like it?" From the other end of the line, his mother's voice was calm but firm. "Make sure it's not just a house, but a place where she feels at peace. That's what she needs the most." Her words lingered in James's mind as he looked at the map, the weight of the decision pressing on him. The office was quiet, save for the soft rustling of papers on the desk. James sat across from Trang, who had recently submitted her resignation to pursue studies abroad. Despite her calm demeanor, James could sense the tension in her, the unspoken words hanging between them. He had always seen Trang as a reliable and diligent worker, but today there was something different about her. "I'm sorry, James," Trang began, her voice soft yet trembling. "There's something I need to tell you, something I've been carrying for a long time." James raised an eyebrow, intrigued yet wary. "What is it, Trang?" Her eyes flickered, and for a moment she seemed lost in thought. Then, with a deep breath, she continued, "My father, he's the one behind everything that's happened to Diep. He's the one who caused her pain." The words hit James like a punch to the gut. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed felt like a betrayal. His heart clenched. How could someone so close to him have been involved in hurting the woman he loved? Trang's eyes filled with regret. "I tried to stop him, James. I swear I did. But he wouldn't listen. I had no choice but to leave, to escape. And now, I just need to ask for your forgiveness, for my silence, for my part in this." James felt the weight of her confession, but the anger inside him was overwhelming. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he demanded, his voice cold. "I didn't want to believe it either," Trang whispered, her voice breaking. "But I need you to know it wasn't me." The silence that followed was thick, both of them lost in their thoughts, unsure of how to move forward from this revelation. Diep stood by the window, staring out at the construction site. The sound of hammers and saws was a constant reminder of the house that was being built for her. But to her, it wasn't just the house. It was a symbol of everything that was changing. She couldn't help but feel torn between wanting to embrace the future and being tethered to the past. The memories of the old house, the one filled with so many painful moments, haunted her. It was the place where everything had begun, where her life had been shattered, where she had lost pieces of herself. She sighed deeply, her gaze drifting to the sky as if searching for answers in the clouds. "Can I really let go of all of this?" she thought to herself. Her heart ached at the thought of leaving behind the ghosts of her past. The house might be new, but could it truly heal her? Could it give her the peace she so desperately longed for? James's voice broke through her thoughts. "Diep," he called gently, stepping into the room. "Are you okay?" She turned to face him, trying to smile but failing miserably. "I'm just not sure, James. I don't know if I'm ready for all of this, the house, the future. It feels like I'm walking away from everything that made me who I am. Can I really move on?" James walked over to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to move on right away, Diep. This house is just the beginning. We'll take it one step at a time, together. I'll be here, no matter what." Diep's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The weight of her emotions, the uncertainty of her future, was too much to bear. Later that evening, James sat across from his mother in the quiet kitchen, the flickering candlelight casting soft shadows on their faces. His mother's expression was unreadable, her usual warmth replaced with something more guarded. James had known for a while that his mother wasn't completely at ease with the idea of building the new house for Diep, but tonight her concerns finally bubbled to the surface. "James," his mother began, her voice low, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking a lot about this house, about Diep, and about you." James frowned, unsure of where the conversation was headed. "What do you mean, Mom?" "I've seen the way you've been throwing yourself into this project," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "You've become so focused on making this house perfect for her, but I'm afraid you're losing sight of something important. You're doing all of this for her, but what about you, James? What about your own peace of mind?" James leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying," his mother continued, her tone growing more pointed, "that you can't fix someone else's brokenness by building them a new house. Sometimes love isn't about grand gestures. It's about letting go and allowing the person to heal at their own pace." James felt a pang of guilt. His mother's words echoed in his mind, unsettling him. Was he pushing too hard? Was he trying to change things too quickly? He had been so focused on giving Diep everything he thought she needed that he hadn't stopped to ask if it was truly what she wanted. "Mom, I just want her to be happy," James replied quietly, the weight of his emotions evident in his voice. "I know you do, but remember," his mother said gently, "there's no rushing this kind of healing. You can't build a future for her if she's still holding on to her past." James nodded slowly, the realization hitting him harder than he expected. His mother was right. He couldn't force Diep to leave her past behind, no matter how hard he tried. As the construction of the house moved forward, the tension between James and Diep grew. The workers were busy, but their progress felt distant to Diep, who couldn't shake the sense that everything was moving too fast. Every day, she watched as the frame of the house took shape, but it felt like the house was being built for someone else, not her. Her mind was constantly pulled back to the memories of her old home, the place that had once been filled with life, love, and pain. One afternoon, as James sat with her to review the final plans, she felt her frustration bubble to the surface. "James," Diep said, her voice tight, "I appreciate what you're doing for me, but this isn't what I want. I don't need something so grand, something so different. I just want peace, a place that feels like home, not this huge, overwhelming structure." James looked at her, his face a mixture of surprise and concern. "I thought this was what you wanted, Diep, a fresh start, a place where you could leave everything behind." She shook her head, her eyes welling up. "I know you want to give me everything, but I don't need all this. I don't need to feel like I'm drowning in space and expectations. I just need a small, quiet place where I can breathe." James's chest tightened. He hadn't realized how much pressure she felt. All his plans, all his efforts to give her a perfect life, were completely missing the mark. "I'm sorry, Diep. I thought I was doing the right thing." Diep sighed, wiping her eyes. "You are, but sometimes the right thing is just to be here, with me, without needing to fix everything." The silence between them was heavy, filled with the weight of both their unspoken fears. James realized in that moment that no matter how big or small the house was, it would never change the fact that they needed to rebuild something far more important: trust and understanding. The day after their heated discussion about the house, James sat alone in his office, staring at the documents on his desk but not truly seeing them. His mind kept drifting back to the conversation with Diep. He had thought he was doing everything right, but in reality, he had been so focused on building a future that he hadn't fully understood what Diep needed from him. It wasn't a new house or grand gestures. It was simply his presence, his patience, and his understanding. As the weight of the situation settled on him, a knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Trang. She entered cautiously, her eyes filled with regret and uncertainty. "James," she started, her voice quivering. "I know I've already said this, but I need to ask you again. Please forgive my father." James looked up, his eyes hardening for a moment. He hadn't expected this. "I already know what your father did, Trang. What he did to Diep, to us. How can you expect me to just forgive him?" Trang's face fell, and she stepped closer, her voice pleading. "I know it's hard to understand. My father, he's a man of pride, and he's done terrible things, but he's also my father. I've tried to stop him, I swear. I want to make things right. Please, James. He's been punished by his conscience. Don't let his mistakes ruin everything." James stood up slowly, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The anger inside him roiled, but it wasn't just anger at Trang's father. It was anger at the entire situation. The hurt, the betrayal, the years of suffering Diep had endured because of one man's actions. "I can't forgive him, Trang," James finally said, his voice steady but filled with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Not for what he's done to her, to Diep. The damage he's caused isn't something that can just be swept away with a simple apology. Not for me, not for her." Trang's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she nodded in understanding. I know, James, I know it's not that simple, but I had to try. The silence that followed was suffocating, both of them trapped in their own grief. Finally, Trang spoke again, her voice softer this time. I just wanted you to know he is sorry, but if you can't forgive him, I understand. I only hope that one day we can all move past this and that you can find peace with Diep. James didn't respond, his mind consumed with conflicting thoughts. Trang left, but the weight of her words remained. He had to decide. Was forgiveness possible in this case, or was justice the only path forward? The days that followed were heavy with unresolved tension. James couldn't shake the feeling of being at a crossroads, torn between his desire for justice and his love for Diep. He spent hours pacing the house, watching the workers finish the final touches on the new home. It should have been a moment of triumph, of new beginnings. Instead, it felt like a stark reminder of the chasm between him and Diep, a chasm he couldn't seem to bridge. One evening, after dinner, he found himself sitting next to Diep in the living room of the old house, the walls now empty and echoing with silence. She was silent too, her gaze distant, lost in her thoughts. He reached out, taking her hand gently in his. "Diep," he said softly, "I've been thinking a lot, about everything, about what we need, what we want. I'm sorry. I've been so focused on fixing everything. I haven't been really seeing you. What do you need from me right now?" Diep looked at him, her eyes filled with a sadness that made his heart ache. "I need time, James. Time to let go. I need to know that you'll be there for me, no matter what happens. Not because of a house or anything else, but because you love me and you understand." James squeezed her hand, his chest tightening. "I do love you. I always will, but I've been struggling with something. I'm still angry about what happened to you, what your father did. I can't just forget that, Diep. I don't know if I can forgive him." Diep took a deep breath, her voice trembling but resolute. "I know you're angry. I am too. But James, I've learned that forgiveness isn't about excusing the wrong. It's about freeing ourselves from the pain. I don't want to carry that burden forever. And I don't want you to either." Her words hung in the air, both a plea and a release. James looked into her eyes, seeing the strength and vulnerability in her all at once. He realized, for the first time, that forgiveness wasn't just about the person who wronged them. It was about him, too. He had to decide if he would let go of his anger and embrace the possibility of healing, or if he would hold on to the past, letting it continue to tear him apart. "I don't know if I can forgive him," James whispered. "But I can try, for us. I want to move forward with you, Diep. I don't want to be stuck in the past anymore." Diep smiled faintly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "That's all I need, James. We'll take it one step at a time, together." James leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead, a promise not of perfection, but of understanding. They both knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, they felt a glimmer of hope. And so, as the last touches were made to the house that symbolized their new life, James and Diep stood at the threshold of a new beginning. The past would always be there, but it no longer held them captive. Together, they would build a future, not just out of bricks and wood, but out of trust, love, and the quiet strength that came from finally letting go.
Câu chuyện say xe quanh James và Diep Hai người yêu nhau nhưng phải đối mặt với những thử thách lớn trong tình cảm. Trang quyết định xây dựng một ngôi nhà mới cho Diệp, nhưng cô lại không thể buông bỏ quá khứ đau khổ, buồn, khiến cô cảm thấy ngôi nhà mới không phải là nơi mình cần. Trang, nhân viên cũ của James, tiết lộ rằng bố cô là người đứng sau những tổn thương mà Diệp phải chịu, khiến James đối mặt với những quyết định giữa việc tha thứ hay trả thù. Cuối cùng, Diệp quyết định tha thứ, nhưng James vẫn đấu tranh giữa công lý và tình yêu. Cả hai đều nhận ra rằng sự hiểu biết và kiên nhẫn mới là chìa khóa để xây dựng một tương lai